Hi, I'll pick up where I left off in the last video from the chapter on the Mordent in Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art das Klavier zu spielen. Unter allen Manieren kommt der Mordent im Basse, ohne dass man ihn andeutet, am öftersten vor. Und zwar über Noten, welche in die Höhe gehen, H, oder springen, I, bei und außer Kadenzen, besonders wenn der Bass nach Hero eine Oktave herunterspringt, K. In my mind, from how Bach presents it, I'm kind of equating the use of the mordent in the bass without it being indicated with an idea of jazz pianists and how standard practices in improvisation might differ in their respective hands depending on the type of person they might be. So here I imagine how the use of the ornament in the bass might have differed depending on the personality of the player. Outside of that, I can also imagine how circumstances might have affected the frequency of its use. And in an ensemble for which the keyboardist is keeper of the rhythm, manuscript or mordents in the bass could help bolster that bass and make it, and subsequently the beat, in the noise of the ensemble more apparent, especially for dances. And those mordents occur over notes that, for one, ascend stepwise. Noten die gehen, gehende Noten, are notes that have a stepwise movement. So when the left-hand notes ascend stepwise, they can get a mordent, as is in the case of 75H. The F ascends stepwise to the G, so the G can have a mordent. One can as well wonder if the presence of the mordent is a clue to the detached nature of those notes, so a clue as to how they are to be performed. And if you are in the world of music, where the right answer will very often anyway come naturally, that information can still be used as an argument to defend your way of playing it, if that way of playing it is being criticized by someone in the cage, by someone in the role of honor, because it's not going to be what they're used to hearing, which is the basis on which they operate. Because yours will be a way of playing it that doesn't exist in the cage. Your professors, the role of honor, they're completely dependent on the recordings they listen to. Take away the recordings and they're lost. They have nothing to tell you. Their lower lip will start quivering and then they'll start blaring. They'll burst into tears at the being overwhelmed by the pressure and the spot they're under. They've been put in. And if you can come up with arguments to support your stance, the old "but that's not how everybody else is doing it" argument that the role of honor are going to have to throw at you while they retreat out the room with their tail between their legs, as the only argument they have, is going to ring hollow. we can generally see that, barring repeated notes, the mordent is used in ascent. And the other cases of when notes in the bass can get a mordent is when they leap upwards, as is in figure 75I. Again, we can see that the ornamented notes in the two examples are struck notes. And then Bach adds that that's especially the case when a downward leap of an octave follows. When Bach provides such guidelines, he's not telling us what he'd personally prefer. He's sharing what works. Things have to work in reality. It's not like we get to decide what works, that it's entirely down to our personal preference. A square shape might be fine and dandy, but not if you're trying to fit it in a round hole. And in a society that believes square shapes fit in round holes, that society's champions are going to be those who have been best able to force a square shape into a round hole. But if that society were to evolve and realize that round shapes fit in round holes, those champions then go from being champions, they're champions, to objects of ridicule, because they went out of the way to satisfy the ignorance of trying to force a square shape into a round hole. The moving of the fingers, the ordering of the tones, they are subject to forces. There is the matter of things like balance. Balance must adhere to external forces if it is to be achieved. And balance is a part of something that is bigger than we are. On our own, we're midgets. We're Lilliput. A great composer like Beethoven or Mozart or Bach knows this and will not include anything that does not adhere to or embrace the laws of nature as they exist in the world of music. A caged composer has no conception of the existence of such things, and his compositions will be full of mistakes against nature. They'll be airplanes that don't fly, so to speak, and in that sense, with the standard of flying in mind as a minimum, unplayable. The best one can do with such compositions is play the notes. So the best one can do with such compositions is play the notes in a rhythm and manner that is artificial, that is disconnected from the world of music, which means in a manner that is flat and empty, which is a manner that provides nothing for the soul. And modern atonal composers have complained about that their compositions don't fly in the hands of performers. that the performances are artificial, synthetic or impersonal. And they, in their ignorance, will blame it on the investment performers put in the interpretation of contemporary works, compared to how they invest in the interpretation of the classics. And not that their works are disconnected from a greater power. And it's not just atonal composers. Composers who write for the piano but have no connection to virtuosity, to narrow the perimeters. Their compositions will be littered with such mistakes against nature. They'll never fly, but they'll demand the flapping of wings. Ravel comes to mind. I'm not saying you can't like Ravel. In paragraph 4 of the introduction, Bach says, Der Lehrmeister, and he's talking about the roll of honor. Der Lehrmeister kann oft selbst nicht mehr als sein Machwerk spielen. So, he's talking about the master, the roll of honor professor, the roll of honor people. And he's saying that they can't do anything except play their work. Now, that's not applicable now. So you can think of everything Bach says there about them applies now to the interpretations, the performances of the roll of honor today. So, der Lehrmeister kann oft selbst nicht mehr als sein Machwerk spielen. Seine verwöhnte und ungeschickte Maschine teilt seinen Gedanken das Steife mit. That's like the doorknob jiggling. With those teaching instructions come the tension and the stiffness. Kann nichts anders setzen, als was bezwingen kann. Mancher wird für einen guten Klavierspieler gehalten. That means the people out there consider them to be good piano players, just like they consider the roll of honor to be good piano players, because Bach is talking about the roll of honor. So mancher wird für einen guten Klavierspieler gehalten, ungeachtet kaum weiß, wie die Bindungen gespielt werden müssen. Now, you could see the connections as being, like legato or tied notes, whatever. I would see that what it means, and that it can be heard when you listen to the roll of honors interpretations, performances, that they don't know how one note is connected to the other. And I think the fourth movement of Opus 101, Beethoven's Sonata in A major, is a good example of that. The correct answer to the fourth movement is that the notes are detached, and you won't hear anybody in the roll of honor play it detached. None of them know. And I have to think of Glenn Gould with that and laugh, because Glenn Gould is the roll of honor's king of detached playing, and he is he has used detached playing, and it has worked out very well for him. He's gotten, but the way he uses it, that he imposes it on a piece. He doesn't use it correctly. He imposes it on a piece, and with that, I'd see Glenn Gould. I mean, I find him entertaining, but with that, I see him as a stopped clock. And what they say, a stopped clock will tell the right time once a day or twice in 24 hours. So I'd see him as a stop clock. And if you imagine me having, knowing that piece and knowing that it's detached, that the notes are detached, unless Beethoven has indicated otherwise with a bow, that the notes are to be played detached. And I'm going to, listen to Glenn Gould's interpretation of that. And then I think, right, here we are. Now the stop clock is finally gonna, this is the chance for the stop clock to tell the right time. And then I put on Glenn Gould's interpretation, and what do I find? That the stop clock decided to start going again right before that point where he was going to tell the right time. So how does Glenn Gould play it? He doesn't play them detached, the notes. He plays them like everybody else plays them. And this supports what I say about functioning illiteracy and your champions in the roll of honor repeating the mistakes of others with complete obliviousness. With that sonata, you will see that it's alarming how similar, how identical all the performances of it are, even though they're fundamentally wrong and they can't defend their interpretations. If the score was to be examined and they were meant to explain the discrepancies between what they do and what's written in the score, even though they can't, that's there, it's still played identically. And it's surprising, it's surprising how identical the length of time it takes for them to play that sonata. And it's around 20 minutes, all of them, 20 minutes it takes. And I've only uploaded 3 of the 4 movements, and I'm already at minute 24. So if or when I upload the first movement, it could end up at hitting the 30-minute mark for that sonata that takes the roll of honor 20 minutes to play. And yet I play all the fast notes faster than the roll of honor played them. So how come they play it so fast? I'm getting too far off, but why do they play it so fast? And why is all that talk about duration and equating it to speed, like with this whole beat nonsense? Why is it so ridiculous? It's ridiculous if you consider it in the sense of why is the roll? How come the roll of honor play it fundamentally slower than I do, yet mine might end up being 10 minutes longer than theirs? It's because in the cage you play the short notes too long and the long notes too short. That's the cage. Bach says the same thing. He says it in a different way. He says how there's places and people in the roll of honor who tend to play the allegros too slow and the adagios too fast. And he says, the contradiction, that's, the obvious contradiction in that doesn't need much explaining or going into. It's quite apparent how ridiculous that is. And I would say that is because they play the fast notes too slowly and the slow notes too quickly, or the short notes too long and the long notes too short. And so it's like, how come they play all the short notes too long How can they still only need 20 minutes to play the piece? It's because they play the long notes too short. It's because they're not able to hold a rest for its proper length. And it's like, a skiing and a slalom race. The skier has to, clear each flag before they get to the finish line. And if they don't clear the flags, they're disqualified. The skier that just goes straight down the hill without clearing any flags, they're going to get to the hill down at the bottom of the slope faster than the skier who clears all the flags. And that's what's happening there. The Roll of Honor clear none of the flags. They go down straight. They ignore the flags. And then they get down to the bottom faster. And then people think that's because they're playing faster. It's not. It's because they're constantly cutting corners. And that should be obvious. It should be obvious. And you can use my interpretation as an aid to help you see the obvious. So, and in that you can hear how none of them, not even Glenn Gould, not even the king of detached playing, had he played his normal detached way in that movement, he would have gotten it correct. That's the functioning illiteracy. Mancher wird für einen guten Klavierspieler gehalten. Ungeachtet kaum weiß, wie die Bindungen gespielt werden müssen. Folglich sehen wir daher eine große Menge elender Arbeiten für das Klavier. That was then. It meant, the result was their compositions were horrible. Nowadays it means their interpretations, their performances are horrible. Und verdorbener Schüler entstehen. So that's what happens. That Doorknob Jiggler, he produces spoiled, ruined students. That is Bach's opinion. If you're looking to the Roll of Honor for your education, for your development, to shape you as a pianist, and you're wondering, I wonder what Bach would think of me in my position. He'd think of you as a student that is getting ruined by the Roll of Honor. The Doorknob Jiggler, he's dishing out the tension and the stiffness along with his thoughts. And what he's going to have is what happens nowadays. How do people respond to tension? They seek refuge in pianissimo. So what are you going to get with the Doorknob Jiggler, who ruins his students. He's going to produce students that become fascinated by pianissimo, that seek refuge in pianissimo. So, by sharing what works in the world of music, Bach is throwing out pearls. It's just who's he throwing them to? Who can recognize it? Who can appreciate it? Because that's the whole point of that saying, throwing the pearls to swine. It's like that because the people who get this, they can appreciate it as little as a pig can appreciate a pearl. That's where that saying comes from. And as well, it's a matter of self-respect and intelligence and dignity that should be, motivating factors in all of this. To have the dignity and self-respect and just the nobility to switch one's own discretion, one's own intelligence, and say, hold on, I want to side with the righteous. I want to side with the intelligence. I want to side with the correct answer. Wegen der Versetzungszeichen richtet sich diese Manier wie die Triller nach den Umständen. Oft kriegt der unterste Ton dieser Manier wegen der Schärfe ein Versetzungszeichen. Tab 6, Figur 76. I can read paragraph 19 from the chapter on trills to refresh our memory of what Bach said regarding trills and accidentals. Wenn bei den Trillern und dessen Nachschläge die Versetzungszeichen nicht angedeutet sind, so muss man sie bald aus dem vorhergehenden, Figur 30a, bald aus der Folge B, bald aus dem Gehöre und der Modulation beurteilen, C. So, for the mordent, when the accidentals are not indicated, one must sometimes determine them from what precedes, sometimes from what the continuation is, and sometimes from one's ear and the modulation. When we look at figure 76, we know, thanks to the information Bach gives us, that the accidental has been introduced for the sharpness, die Schärfe. And we could assume that none of the criteria he mentioned in paragraph 19 have been undermined or violated in the process. In the previous figure 75b, we can as well imagine that accidental, added to the G's mordent, having been potentially introduced for the sake of the sharpness, and that although, for all the information we have, we could assume the key of C or A minor, from the key signature, we could very much be looking at a spell in G major, which would, therefore, result in the following decorated A if its mordent were to get a G sharp, undermining or sabotaging that tonality, not to mention it clashing with the preceding G. That's why Bach didn't give that mordent an accidental. even though the sharpness could potentially be just as welcome there as it is with the G. In 75H, the preceding F will hinder the lower note of the mordent over the G getting a sharp sign. Plus, it would undermine the modulation. It is the modulation the roll of honour will most frequently violate, and many of their suggested accidentals, when it comes to ornaments, undermine the tonality and thus should be approached with caution or scepticism. That mordent that I execute with, that I use the alternative way, for which I use the alternative way to perform the mordent, that is, you'll see a sharp, a G sharp, recommended by editors, which is wrong. That happens so often because they have no conception of modulation or tonality. And if one doesn't express tonality in one's playing, because one has absolutely no idea how one expresses tonality in one's playing, if one can only play notes, then that doesn't matter. And their ear won't help them either. If there is no tonality there, if there is no modulation there, do what you like. It doesn't matter. You can do what you like in the cage. Nothing is of consequence. That you'd have to go to your professor and actively bring up the topic of how one expresses tonality in one's playing, because it has never been even remotely touched upon in your education, says it all. And you think the cage doesn't exist, that it's a figment of my imagination. In the second movement of Opus 101, Beethoven's Sonata in A major, the Roll of Honour champions and Beethoven award winners wear their ignorance of modulation on their sleeves. Beethoven indicates the modulation and avoids the potential confusion that the preceding G in the left hand could cause by including the afterstroke with its accidental in the notation of the trills of bar 18. So the afterstroke is the turn at the end of the trill, what I call the turn at the end of the trill. An afterstroke is is how I translate Nachschlag, which is what Bach calls that, the Nachschlag. So Beethoven indicates the modulation by including the afterstroke with its accidental in the notation of the trills of bar 18, which does not mean to say the preceding trills in bar 16 have no afterstroke. But that is exactly how the Roll of Honour understand it. They think Beethoven is saying to play an afterstroke, but he's not. He's indicating the modulation. So what do? They play the preceding trills, all the Roll of Honour, one genius after the other, without an afterstroke, thereby violating more than just one aspect of good taste, and advertising exactly that ignorance and display of bad taste Beethoven, as it has been long documented, came to expect of them. That can be checked. And the findings of that checking will serve as evidence for everything I said regarding their functioning illiteracy and the scale of it. Because if you don't wake up to what's going on It means they'll be dragging you down with them. You can heed these words of warning from me and from Bach, or you can ignore them. But if you don't examine them, if you don't give it proper attention and make up your own mind, you might be ignoring exactly that'll save you. It can be checked. You can listen to all these players and you'll see what they do is in bar 16 they play the trills without an afterstroke, and in bar 18 they play the trills with an afterstroke because they think that's what Beethoven is saying. But Beethoven is not saying that. He's talking to literate people. He's laughing at the functioning illiterates, the roll of honor. I think Beethoven I did notice that Horowitz plays the afterstroke and the trills in bar 16, which I was happy to hear. But you can check it out, check the rest of them. Copying the mistakes of others with complete obliviousness. None of them are independent artists. And you could listen to my interpretation of it, the only correct interpretation that exists, and I say that as a testament. I put that forward as a testament to the true way to play the piano, and my playing representing that. And what you're hearing there is not my playing, it's the playing of Beethoven. And again, I would welcome the serious study of that claim, because finding out the right answer to that, what is true, will have, I mean, anybody with imagination will be able to imagine the implications of that or the significance of that. But you could listen to mine thinking this is how Beethoven plays it, and you could listen to certain places like before the beginning of the fourth movement, and then during the fourth movement, those bits that are twice as slow as the rest. And I think it's hilarious to think, like, when you think of, thinking of it in terms of sensuality or something. I don't on that, and think that, like, what did they say about Mozart or Horowitz? How was he branded as the last of the romantics? And if you just look at those pianists that are considered romantic pianists, and imagine what that romantic implies, and then the way they perform those sections compared to how I performed them. You can see, like, how ridiculous it is to call them romantic. What they do in any way romantic, or is it a wham bam thank you ma'am affair? It's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane. It's insane. What's going on? In the second movement of K457 can be found an example of how the suggested accidental by the roll of honour undermines the tonality. In bar 49 we have G Henley Verlag suggesting an A natural that, in that situation, undermines the E flat major tonality. In figure 75, the D sharp does not undermine the E major harmony. And when the tonality is undermined, it's like a spanner in the works. It'll keep the plane grounded, or it'll sink the ship. And that your champions follow those suggestions shows how oblivious they and their ears are to the modulation. There is not a single person in the roll of honour that expresses tonality in their playing. Not one. That's why they all fail so spectacularly with their renditions of Mozart's Fantasy. And what does that say of their adoring public, of the classical music community, of all those verdorbene Schüler, of the products of that roll of honour? with the Emperor's New Clothes, there was only one kid who saw through the farce. Okay, I'll leave it at that for today, and I'll pick up where I left off in the next video. Thanks. Bye.